They called it madness. But to the ancient royals, it was something far more powerful. It was divine. It was sacred. It was a language only the gods could understand. Only a chosen few could speak. In the ancient palaces of Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and beyond, rulers who whispered nonsense to the walls or screamed prophecies into the wind were not thrown into dungeons. They were worshipped, feared, sometimes even crowned. Because in a world where omens ruled fate, where comets could depose kings and eclipses could end dynasties, madness wasn't a flaw. It was a key. And if you dared to wield it, you could unlock kingdoms. Take Nebuchadnezzar II, the powerful king of Babylon, a man who once ruled the most dazzling city on earth. And yet, for 7 long years, he roamed the fields like a wild animal, eating grass, hair unkempt, nails like bird claws. Madness, perhaps. But in the biblical book of Daniel, his descent into lunacy was not seen as punishment. It was transformation. He was touched by the divine, humbled by heaven. And when he returned, no one dared question his right to rule. Because he had crossed to the other side and come back. Who else could claim such a thing? Or look east to China's Han Dynasty, where Emperor Wu, obsessed with immortality, surrounded himself with alchemists who fed him mercury and made him hallucinate conversations with gods. He began to believe he was a celestial being trapped in a mortal body. Madness? Again. To his court? No. It was enlightenment. He wasn't mad, he was ascending. He launched expeditions to find the mythical Penglai Island, hoping to meet immortals. Thousands died in these quests. But who could question the emperor? He was closer to heaven than any of them. But perhaps no ruler embraced the power of madness more completely than Caligula, the young Roman emperor whose name still echoes with horror. He believed he was a god. Not metaphorically, literally. He spoke to the moon, appointed his horse as a priest, threatened to make it a senator. He demanded that statues of Jupiter be replaced with his own image. Was this ego or strategy? Because here's the terrifying truth. The more outrageous his actions, the more his enemies hesitated. No one knew what he'd do next. In that chaos, he held the empire in his fist, for a while at least. And then there's the medieval world where holy fools were seen as saints in disguise. In Russia, the Eurodivi walked naked through snow, screamed obscenities, lived in filth, and yet Tsars bowed to them. Ivan the Terrible, one of history's bloodiest monarchs, feared the holy fool Basil the Blessed more than any Bojar. Why? Because madness, real or feigned, was untouchable. It placed you outside the rules of court. Outside the reach of assassins. You could curse a czar to his face and live. No minister could do that. But a madman was God's mouth. This idea wasn't isolated. Across cultures, there was a common, disturbing thread. That madness was a conduit to the divine. In West Africa, some kings faked seizures to prove their link to spirits. In Polynesian cultures, trance-like frenzies were seen as proof of ancestral possession. In medieval Europe, epilepsy was called the sacred disease, and if a royal had it, was considered a sign of divine election. But not all madness was welcomed. When it got to real, when hallucinations turned to violence, paranoia, to butchery, then the line blurred. French King Charles VI believed he was made of glass. He wore iron rods sewn into his clothing to keep from shattering. Once, he killed several of his own knights in a fit of delusion. His court was terrified, but they kept him on the throne. Why? Because to remove him would be to admit the crown could break. That divine right could crack like porcelain. So instead, they wrapped their king in velvet and silence, hoping no one would hear the glass rattle. But perhaps the darkest twist of all was that many royals weren't mad, yet pretended to be. Because in a cutthroat world where poison waited in goblets and daggers behind curtains, madness was the ultimate shield. Pretend you're unwell and your enemies don't plot, they pity, or hesitate, or laugh. until it's too late, until you strike. This was the whispered strategy of King Ludwig II of Bavaria, the mad king who built fairy tale castles and wandered through moonlit forests talking to himself. Historians debate whether he was insane or simply wanted to escape the crushing demands of politics. Was his madness a mask or a mirror? And what of Joanna of Castile, Juana la Loca, who clutched the corpse of her dead husband, refusing to let go, believing he would rise again? Mad with grief, or crushed by a world that stripped her power, her voice, and her agency. Her madness became a prison convenient for those who wanted her crown. In truth, the story of royal madness is not just about delusions and whispers. It's about power. How it's protected. How it's feared. How it's sometimes easier to believe a ruler is insane than to admit the system is. And it's about how those in power learned to weaponize the one thing no one dared to question: divine madness. Because in a world where kings ruled by God's will, where every tremor of the sky was an omen, and every birthmark a sign, what better proof of your right to rule than to be touched by something no one understood? Madness in the ancient world was not weakness. It was mystery. And mystery was power. So the next time you read about a king who screamed at shadows or an empress who heard voices, ask yourself, were they truly mad, or were they playing a deeper game? One that used fear, wonder, and the unknowable as tools. One that crowned madness, not as illness, but as a throne all its own. And in the end, which is more terrifying, a mad king, or a sane one pretending to be mad and winning?